So now I would like to introduce our second keynote speaker. This is Namrita Mahindro. She's the Chief Digital Officer of the Chemical Division at Aditya Birla Group. Welcome, Namrita.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for welcoming me.
So we're going to switch from healthcare to some heavy industry now and see how digitization makes a difference here. Can I just check that you can share your slides?
Can you not see the slides?
They're just coming up now. So if you just put it in presentation mode, then that would be fine.
Just give me a moment. Yeah, are we good? Are we good, John? Do we have the slides?
I can't quite see it in presentation mode yet.
Would you like me to reshare?
Well, you could upload it also, but it didn't seem to go into presentation mode. It'll be much clearer if you can put it into presentation
One
mode.
second. I'm going to reshare these. Just give me a moment.
So I guess the complexity that we saw with healthcare is also quite complex in the industrial sense. That's great. I can see that perfectly. Over to you, Namrita.
Thank you so much, John. So, good morning, friends. I know we've had an amazing first keynote on the health sector, but let me first start by just thanking the API team for having me over for this session today. What I'd like to do over the next 20 minutes or so is speak a little bit about, our journey at the Aditya Birla Group in the chemical filaments and insulator sector. I know that's a mouthful, but that's the sector that I represent. What our supply chain transformation journey has been, and the role of technology and APIs in actually connecting the entire ecosystem. So starting with, one second. Can you still see the screen? Can you still see the screen?
Yes, I can see the screen. What I see now, we had the title slide a moment ago, and now I can see the Time magazine.
Sorry, I think there was a slight lag, so apologies for that. So what we've seen over the last 2 years is a bunch of challenges, which have been unprecedented in some senses. And so the kind of disruption that they caused was both on the demand side. On the one side, we saw, because we're in the chemical sector, so we saw demand of certain, products go up significantly, like chlorine or, certain other chemical products which went into, the making of disinfectants, etc. That went up significantly. And on the other hand, we had other not urgent, not essential products where the demand, collapsed completely. There was a constraint on manufacturing. So while some of our, plants had to get into business right away in terms of, within a week of the lockdown happening, the reason for that was because they catered, as I said, as I gave the example of chlorine that is used for water purification. And so that came under essential services. So within the COVID environment, we were mandated to reopen our plants and get them operational. And on the other hand, we had others which had to shut down for, long periods of time. There was an impact on the labor. There were issues with transportation, whether it was, with the ships, the Suez Canal event we all are aware of, or whether it was, what was happening on the roads with a lot of the workforce migrating back to their villages, to their native places. And both with the customers and the distributors, again, there were a bunch of challenges that we saw. But we also saw in this an opportunity to see how we could reinvent our supply chain. How could we make sure that these challenges across the entire value chain that we were seeing could actually lead to becoming a competitive advantage for us? And I think some of the areas that we looked at were, in terms of saying if the service levels have reduced, what can we do in terms of establishing a new SLA for the kind of service levels that we offer to our customers and get from our suppliers. If the logistics costs were going up, what could we do in terms of using technology to actually manage that more effectively. And again, from an inventory point of view, moving from a just in time to actually stocking up a lot of inventory, which is also not ideal. How could we look at building up systems and processes so that we could manage that more effectively? And to enable that, what we needed really was a bunch of capabilities to be developed, both internally as well as externally. So from a people and process perspective, we had to figure out what kind of organization setup do we need to have to support our supply chain teams. What do we need to do in terms of building capabilities within our IT teams, within the business teams, and also look at what was the kind of outcome we could provide to our customers. How could we support our suppliers? And again, what were the data assets that we already had, which we could use for improving our intelligence, improving our insights, and creating a better sort of environment to be able to provide services which were seamless, services which were continuous, and services which were flexible to products and services which are flexible to be able to manage the huge variance that was happening in the supply chain. What we did particularly over there was look at restating what our digitalization objective would be, as we were looking at transforming our entire supply chain function. And I think some of the things which came to define what kind of outcome we would look at from this digitalization journey that we were going to take was we were going to look at something which was extremely agile. And and again, the best person who comes to mind is Usain Bolt from an agility point of view. So if there were delays which were coming as a result of logistics, we actually went multimodal over there. So we predominantly used to look at rail as our at roadways as our key transportation mechanism or logistics partner, and we then went multimodal over there for a lot of our other products also, where we started using the rail network far more extensively. Similarly, from a perspective of looking at how could we get more autonomous across the value chain, was something else that came to mind. In terms of being connected, I think that was the need of the hour. So while we had a control tower, while we had, and we were already connected to some extent with our tier one partners, but the need was to go beyond that and see how could we, connect from a logistics point of view with the entire ecosystem, and not just with the tier one partners. Have the connections not just with our own assets, but also with the marketplace assets 100%. And again, the person that you're seeing in this picture is a gentleman named by the name of Chris Dancy, and again, he became sort of our reference point because he is considered as the most connected person in this world. So he has about 300 to 700 devices which are monitoring him on a daily basis. And he says actually, and that's been happening for the last 5+ years, and he says that's actually led to a better quality of life. So we are hoping that we can emulate that with the connectedness across our supply chain also. Similarly, the need to be dynamic. So we had a very, very I would say robust and consistent supply chain. So about 80 to 90% of our supply was very much pre-decided, was very routine and repetitive in the pre-COVID era. And from there we went to a very dynamic situation, and that was something that we weren't geared up for. So how do we become far more dynamic was something else that we looked out for as part of our scenario planning, as from a planning point of view and from an execution point of view, just looking at making sure that we were able to actually turn around things in near real time. Again, from an innovation point of view, Clayton Krishnan is known as one of the biggest disruptors in the innovation space. He was a professor at Harvard, and he taught innovation. So the intent is can we keep innovating, can we keep trialing? And I think the acceptance of failure was the other thing which sort of became mainstream within the organization as a culture, to say, yes, let's experiment, let's innovate, even if it means that we repeatedly fail, which is a very native mindset to a startup, but not so native to a large traditional organization. And so this shift happened per se. I think from an intelligence point of view, of course, by being connected, we were gathering a lot more data. And as we took this journey, we wanted to, then become more, gather more insights, become more intelligent on this journey, more resilient. And finally, the intent was to increase the transparency. And again, I'll talk a little bit about, the kind of initiatives which are currently work in progress around the transparency side to really increase the transparency. Some have been completed, but others are sort of, working, are getting along. So towards building this competitive advantage that we were aspiring for, we realized that we would need to be far more innovative than what we had been previously. And I talked about the fact that we looked at reimagining our supply chains. So the intent was we go away from a very monolithic structure to a far more modular structure. We look at building everything as we've done in our manufacturing, where we have 20 different plants. Similarly for our supply chains, make them far more Lego-like, if I can call them that, self-replicating, elements, which could then be plugged and played into different aspects of new plants which were being set up, or existing plants where we didn't have the kind of agility and robustness that we previously wanted. Similarly, from an operational excellence point of view, it was about looking at how do we look at our inbound, outbound, logistics, and what are some of the things that we could do over there to drive greater agility and to drive greater excellence. And again, I'll touch upon a couple of initiatives that we took in that space. The ecosystem play that I talked about earlier, this connectedness that we've started building up, right from managing risk a lot better to making sure that there's transparency across the board. Has sort of become a key mantra for us as we look at connecting to the nth level of our ecosystem, looking at connecting a lot more data, not just about ourselves, our customers, and our suppliers, but also the larger macro microeconomic factors, looking at putting in a lot of other elements into play, which would allow us to have a much better ecosystem play. So if there's a factor which is impacting our suppliers or our customers, then what is the roll-on effect onto us is something that we are trying to begin to determine. Capability building, again, because I said that we had a very routine way of looking at how our supply chain functioned. So really building in new capabilities, bringing the teams up to speed to look at doing things in a completely different manner. So it was about working on their mindsets as well as working on their on their skill sets. And that is something which has been done over the period of the last 2 odd years or so. From a data point of view, the aspiration clearly became to have a unified view of the data across the entire supply chain, across the entire procurement and logistics space. And the intent was, how do we then create those data lakes? And that is something that we are still working on right now as we speak, in terms of actually being able to look at data holistically as opposed to in silos. And finally, from an infrastructure perspective, while we'd started our cloud journey, but we've accelerated that significantly. And I think a key aspect for us has been the number of connections that we are trying to create across the entire ecosystem. So looking at the entire API gateways, and there are a bunch of partners that we are working with, that we are piloting different use cases with, because what we've also realized is that not one partner fits all the requirements. And so therefore, having a mix of partners is actually what works more effectively for us, depending on the use case, depending on the partners that we want to bring into that particular ecosystem. And again, as I said, we've had at our group level a bunch of different sort of partners that we look at. This innovation partner ecosystem that I'm talking about over here, whether it is from a cloud perspective, whether it's some of the system integrators that we have, whether it's the 300 plus partners that we have on our AAA startup program, whether it's the product companies that we work with, or the research firms, and this is just who we already have currently, established relationships with. But there's a much longer list, obviously, of these partnerships already in place, as well as those which are in the making. So whether it is the academia, which goes hugely into our startup ecosystem play also, or whether it is industry and collaborating with partners over there. I think that is something that sort of is the linchpin for making sure that we can actually gather that intelligence, make those that information available, and be that much more ready and prepared for what may potentially hit us as we move forward, in our business as usual sort of play. Again, from an intelligence point of view, while we are looking at data, but there is a complete platform that we are building up as an intelligence hub, which takes the data both from internal as well as external sources. And some of it is still manual, some of it is through APIs, and again, going down that API route, collecting data, whether it is economic data, microeconomic, or whether it is social media data, or whether we are looking at data that we pick up from other industrial bodies, whether it's our index prices, or whether it is looking at data sources like Bloomberg, etc., for commodity pricing. Those linkages are now getting activated, and in digital forms. Where they were already activated, they're getting connected across the ecosystem. And the intent is, as I mentioned earlier, to have that one single view of the of all of the data. From an operational point of view, I think we've looked at the space in terms of the three areas of procurement, supply chain, and logistics. And again, I've just pulled out a couple of initiatives over here. And again, I don't think I'm going to have the time to go through all of them, but I'll touch upon some of them briefly over here in terms of what we've been doing. So, for example, for procurement, we realized we had a complete automation from the PO process perspective, but prior to that, the automation was missing, and so we've actually gone back and started working on building a PO process automation, pre-PO process automation system, whereby we would be able to actually gather all of the information about the various responses that we get from RFQs. So again, these RFQs were typically sent out manually. We will now have a system whereby the various vendors who've been invited from the ecosystem for a particular RFQ can actually come onto this platform. They can look at submitting their responses. And once those responses are submitted, they can all be manually, can be on the system. They can be judged in terms of their relevance, in terms of their product, requirement fit, as well as those decisions can be taken completely on the system rather than being in the inbox of one individual or another individual. So really moving from a people-centric to a process-centric sort of approach is something that we've been looking at. Of course, on spend analytics and the demand-driven material side is more internal, and there is more collaboration which is happening internally between systems and between connecting those systems which were not necessarily connected to the same extent. On the supply chain planning side, I'll talk in more detail, about this new platform. So we have a platform in place, which was, there set up over the last 4 or 5 years back. It was set up, but what we found was that it was highly inadequate for us in the, in the pandemic, and that's where the need to upgrade that to the next level of the platform became important. And I've got another slide completely dedicated to it, so I'm just going to skim through this right now over here. From a logistics point of view, there's a lot of work that we've been doing. So whether it was, automating our entire inbound logistics, and this meant that, we were going back and creating transporter portals, whereby we were connecting with the transporter so that the information flow was, two-way. It was transparent. It was, it was available in real time. And so, whatever needed to be done could be done pretty much in real time. Similarly, with our tonner management, so there are regulatory pressures in terms of how much chlorine you can produce and store in a given day. because our tonners would go out, and we would have no visibility of when they're going to come back. We would have to buy as many as 2 to 3,000 new tonners each year. And so to improve that visibility, again, we've gone in for RFID tags. And again, I'll talk more about that. There is a control tower that we have, and this was a blessing in disguise for us during the pandemic. Of course, we are now looking at upping the features and the functionalities of this. Similarly, from a price forecasting perspective and backhaul optimization point of view, there was a lot of work that we looked at doing in terms of saying, what is there in terms of the current ecosystem, what routes are most viable. And that meant that we had to go out and, for example, link it up with the information which is available on eVahan, which also tells us about, which are the registered vehicles, about, where they the ability to track where they're applying, what routes they're taking from a backhaul perspective, so that we can actually optimize the cost, for the deliveries which are happening to our customers, so that that cost can be brought down. I'll talk about the transporter scorecard, and then again the end-to-end visibility through blockchain, where again what we are looking at doing over here is seeing how we can actually, both for inbound as well as for outbound logistics, especially with our international companies, how can we look at creating a lot more visibility by tying in with the customs, tying in with the client, tying in with the shipping companies, and ensuring that there is complete visibility across the board, as the time for the shipment is typically anywhere between 20 to 40, 50 days, for a particular shipment to happen, either from us to the client, or from our suppliers to us. I talked about the supply chain planning, and if we look at this from a bottom-up approach, really looking at understanding what kind of data is available in the market. So as I said, prior to COVID, it was all very internal data that we were looking at, in terms of doing demand sensing, in terms of understanding what, and it was also very tacit knowledge. It was available, let us say, with with a particular manager, who was looking at talking to the customers and had that relationship. And so it was pretty much people centric, as I mentioned earlier. Also, what we've tried to do over here is bring in various data points which are related to the market, which are related to the customers, which are related to competition. And this is something that we're still in the process of building up. It is a third-party platform that we're looking at. But the ability to bring all of this data together to do far better demand forecasting, demand sensing, and demand planning is what the intent is over here. And similarly with the supply side. And once we've got all of this data together, really looking at how do we put this entire knowledge graph together, with the intent of ensuring that we understand how the network works. We've got some products which are available multi-site, so where is the most optimal sort of plant to send out the particular product to a customer. And so therefore from a logistics optimization perspective, what would make sense. Similarly, from a point of view of looking at what kind of competition play do we have in a given space. And while that does not change on a day-to-day basis, but again, because of the uncertainties, first with the pandemic, now with the war, it becomes important to understand what the competition plays, and what is going to be the impact of that on us. The China Plus One also has a huge impact in terms of our sourcing, in terms of our production, and that is governed by the demand which is created in the market. So really looking at all of this sort of from an end-to-end perspective, to be able to plan both our demand and our supply a lot better, to sense it as opposed to just plan for it, and to be able to eventually allow all of this to contribute back to enhanced margin maximization, is what the end goal is. Similarly, with our inbound logistics automation that we did, I think one of the things which, while we've got 9 different touch points over here where we did the automation, but I think the key aspect for us was that, the amount of time that the transporter spent in terms of, coming in to the plant, waiting for their chance to get their payments, their trucks weighed, and for them to exit. Sort of all of that became far more streamlined. All of that happened, far more effectively, and the cycle time reduction, as I've said over here, went down by 80%. Similarly, the weighbridge operations, in terms of the weighment, we had, 2 resources per weighbridge, who were standing there and who were manually inputting the information into the data, into the systems. Today, this has been completely automated, and that obviously has led to a certain level of, optimization, and re-resourcing of the people for these kind of functions. That's just another initiative, again, to make all of this happen. The kind of, interconnectedness that we needed to make sure across the transporter ecosystems through the transporter portal, as well as our internal ecosystems, whether it was SAP, which is our ERP, or the other systems that we had at the plant. That happening seamlessly, has been key to, the success of this particular project. We started with one plant. We are now rolling it out across to the other plants after seeing the success over the last, last year and a half. Moving on, again, I talked about the tonner management earlier, and I did talk actually about some of the benefits. So the ability to really manage this a lot more effectively. And I think the most important aspect for us was the integration with the customer end, because that was key in making sure that, we brought down the costs, capex costs, as well as made sure that, because chlorine is, is in some senses hazardous, and therefore needs to be, managed very carefully from a safety point of view. It was a big check mark for us. And similarly, from from having that visibility, our ability to plan a lot better sort of, went up significantly. And again, over here, it was about, through the customer portal, can we actually connect with our customers? Can we give them access? And can we actually, through RFID tags, actually track the end-to-end movement of, of these systems? The transporter scorecard, again, does the same thing, of tracking our transporters, tracking their drivers. It's been a huge benefit for our transporter ecosystem also, both the marketplace as well as our own, because it's allowed them to now actually start understanding, how do their drivers perform from a safety point of view, from a compliance point of view, from a performance perspective, and that sort of, allows them to incentivize their truckers, optimize, who they would provide on which routes far more effectively. So this is again something that we have been doing. This is the revised version, the 2.0 of the scorecard that we have created, and we are looking at again enhancing that further, bringing in, as I said, the safety, the compliance, and the performance data would all sit separately. In the 1.0 version, we've actually bought in 3 different systems. So from an internal point of view of connecting all of these systems, we've actually now got it onto this one transporter scorecard system, per se. Again, this was in the very early stages of, the COVID, that we realized that, we had a lot of our raw materials, which were single source, and single source products implied that, we were at risk. So we had to make sure that, one, our single source products were not, those suppliers were not at risk of going out of business, and 2, we had to make sure that if they required any kind of support, financial or otherwise, we were there. Also, from a point of view of quality and safety, we started seeing some compromises beginning to happen, and so our supplier risk model actually has, not just the financial elements, but also the safety, sustainability, and the quality elements baked into the model, with the intent that we can This is not a stick policy. This is really to enable them to continue to be in business and to help them actually take up their performance levels, also, so that the entire industry sort of has better sort of performance levels in terms of the risks that are getting identified and how those can be optimized. We now, while we've been running this, with the suppliers, initially on a manual basis, then we started connecting with some systems. Of course, the systems are only available with the tier one suppliers, but we are now also looking at building certain AIML models which can do a predictive scorecard on this, which was earlier being done manually, and again bring in far more intelligence than before. Of course, this means then, across the supplier ecosystem that we have, we need to be connected far more deeply into their systems to enable this to happen effectively and to completely automate it. So this is again another journey which is work in progress. I think from a point of view of the way forward as we look at it, we have established a new risk management framework, and really the key aspect over here is the secondary and the tertiary intelligence networks that we've started building up, which help us predict risk a lot better and manage risk far more efficiently when things don't go as per plan. The second aspect is in terms of a new supply constraint playbook that we are looking at building up. And again, the intent over here is how do we become anti-fragile, just like the vaccine, the immunity that we've built, how do we build up that immunity within our supply chain? How much more connected do we need to be? How do we need to bring in agility and transparency to make sure that we can limit the impact of disruptive events which happen in our supply chain? And if there is an ability to look at creating some kind of preventive measures, then then putting them into place. As I said, multi-sourcing was one example that I had given earlier. Looking at a regionalization is another example. But look at a bunch of constraints that we have and see then how do we overcome those constraints far more effectively. And then from a blockchain point of view, while we have a couple of early stage use cases, whether it is looking at invoice discounting, whether it is looking at connecting the entire ecosystem from a logistics point of view, but I think we're looking at building up on these to solve a lot of different problems, which deal beyond the current use cases, whether it's around pilferage, whether it is around looking at, as I said, looking at greater transparency and agility, or whether it is looking at new forms of exchange of value also. And again, it may be more common for certain supply chains, but that is something which is definitely up for a discussion, but that's still in early stages. And to support all of this, I think.
So Namrita, I have a number of questions actually. So I'm just wondering.
This is my last slide.
Oh, okay, sure. Go ahead.
So this is my last slide, and really to enable all of this, I think what we are looking at is changing the backend infrastructure, making it digital ready, and that is to talk about the capabilities, the data and analytics. And I'm now, because of the paucity of time, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, and the infrastructure that is required to be able to support all of this change that we're doing on the front end. So with that, I'm going to pause and happy to take any questions that may be there.
Sure. Well, thanks very much, Namrita, for that great overview. And I guess the real benefit of having you paint this picture is that you show not just that there's a lot of IT systems and data and going lots of places, but that how that touches the physical world. Because just as the supply chain got a really hard shock 2 years ago, I think the supply chains are still strained because there's talk about containers being in the wrong place for the shipping activity. What you also painted, though, is some very specialized things. The materials that you're transporting are in many cases hazardous, and there's only a certain type of equipment that can manage that. So I guess what I've been thinking in terms of the supply chain is that a lot of companies, particularly manufacturing companies, have been using just-in-time inventory management and only having enough inventory to support the next order, and that lack of slack in the chain has caused a lot of challenges. But I think what I didn't hear you say is we're just going to keep twice or three times as much inventory. And I think the reason you didn't say that is because it's so expensive to do that. It's expensive for everybody to not only pay for that, but to store it as well. And probably some of these things are quite difficult to store. So to sort of summarize that thread, what you're looking to do is there is probably still some slack in the whole logistics chain, and you're just looking to, but you are looking to through the transparency of data, understand where all those different components are, so that you can manage them more efficiently and bring them to the point where they're needed.
Yes, John. So while we did initially, increase the inventory that we had available, and we moved away from just in time to actually hoarding, if I can call it that, some of the inventory in preparation for the uncertain times that we were in. I think what we are now looking at doing is going back to a different system where we would be looking at demand-based material planning. And the reason for doing that is that is actually dependent then on the kind of usage that you have of that particular product, and that is far more accurate than your demand forecasting alone, because then what kind of inventories are being utilized basis real-time orders which are coming in from your customers, and therefore that allows you to do it's a pull mechanism, so it allows you to be more efficient with your with your supply chain management or your inventory management more particularly. So there are new systems, new processes which are being put in place. You're right, this is still an ongoing journey for us.
Well, thanks very much for sharing that picture with us, Namrita. I really appreciate you setting the scene, actually, even for our very next track after the break on data-driven business. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you for having me here.